The letter had traveled nearly 1,000 miles, yet the words inside hadn't changed with the distance. Teresa Donovan stood on the wooden platform of Presidio, Texas, clutching the crumpled paper in her trembling hands while dust swirled around her boots. The year was 1885, and she had come all this way based on a promise now revealed as a cruel deception. "Last train until Tuesday," announced the station master, his voice barely carrying over the departing locomotive's whistle. "You being met by someone, miss." Teresa gazed down the single dirt road that comprised the main street of Presidio. Nobody was waiting. Nobody would be coming. The man who had written to her for 6 months, who had proposed marriage and sent her money for passage, Samuel Bolton, had apparently never existed. "Yes," she lied, forcing a smile. "I'm sure they're just running late." The station master gave her a skeptical look but returned to his office as Teresa gathered her 2 modest bags. At 22, she had left everything behind in Boston: a dreary job as a seamstress, a tiny room in a boarding house, and her last living relative, an ailing aunt who had encouraged her Western adventure. Now she stood alone in a frontier town with nowhere to go and dwindling funds. The sun beat down mercilessly as Teresa made her way toward what appeared to be the town's only hotel, a 2-story building with a hand-painted sign reading "Presidio Inn." Inside, a stern-faced woman with gray hair pulled tight into a bun looked up from behind a wooden counter. "I need a room," Teresa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just for a night or two. $2 a night," the woman replied, eyeing Teresa's fine traveling dress now stained with the journey's dust. In advance, Teresa paid with precious coins from her dwindling purse. Once alone in the small, sparse room, she unfolded the letter again. "My dearest Teresa," it read in now familiar handwriting, "I await your arrival with the greatest anticipation. Remember to ask for Bolton Ranch upon your arrival in Presidio. Any local can direct you. Yours forever, Samuel." Tears threatened, but Teresa blinked them back. She hadn't traveled across the country to surrender to despair on her first day. After washing her face in the basin, she changed into her second-best dress, a practical blue calico, and headed downstairs. "Pardon me," she asked the innkeeper, "but could you direct me to the Bolton Ranch?" The woman frowned. "Bolton Ranch, there's no such place around here." Teresa's heart sank. "Perhaps you know Samuel Bolton then." "Never heard that name in my life, and I know everyone worth knowing in Presidio County." Outside, Teresa walked aimlessly down the main street, taking in the handful of businesses: a general store, a saloon, a small bank, the telegraph office where she'd already inquired about Samuel Bolton, to no avail, and what appeared to be a doctor's office. At the edge of town sat a weathered building with a sign reading "Sheriff's Office." She hesitated before climbing the steps and entering the small, tidy office. A deputy looked up from his desk. "Can I help you, miss?" "I hope so. I'm looking for information about Samuel Bolton or Bolton Ranch." The young deputy shook his head. "No Boltons around these parts that I know of. Sheriff Watts might know better, but he's out until tomorrow." Defeated, Teresa thanked him and left. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since early morning. The general store seemed the safest option for a woman alone in a strange town. Inside, an older man with spectacles greeted her from behind a counter stacked with merchandise. "Afternoon, miss. New to town?" "Yes." "I just arrived today," Teresa replied, selecting a small loaf of bread and some cheese. "I'm looking for someone who may be in the area." "Samuel Bolton." The shopkeeper's expression shifted slightly. "Bolton, you say? Can't say I know anyone by that name. You expected to meet him here." Teresa hesitated, not wanting to reveal her complete vulnerability. "We had an arrangement of sorts." "Ah," said the man, understanding, lighting his eyes. "You wouldn't be the first young lady to come west on certain promises." Heat rushed to Teresa's face. "It wasn't like that. We corresponded for months. He sent for me specifically." The shopkeeper's expression softened with pity. "I'm sorry to tell you this, miss, but there's a nasty business going on with these mail-order bride situations. Some men, not proper men, mind you, think it amusing to lure young women out west with no intention of following through. Or worse, they're working with certain establishments looking for employees. The implication struck Teresa like a physical blow. That's impossible, she stammered, though dread was already settling in her stomach. Where are you staying? The shopkeeper asked kindly, the Presidio Inn, but only for a night or two. I need to find work. I'm Harold Mason, the man offered. My wife might know of something suitable for a young lady. Stop by tomorrow and I'll introduce you. Teresa thanked him and paid for her modest meal, the reality of her situation becoming clearer with each passing moment. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows across the street as a group of cowboys rode into town, clearly fresh from the range and headed for the saloon. They were loud and boisterous, their laughter carrying on the evening air. Teresa quickened her pace, clutching her paper-wrapped food. "Evening, miss," called one of the men as they passed. Teresa nodded curtly without breaking stride. Back in her room, she ate her simple dinner and tried to formulate a plan. Her savings would last 2 weeks at most. She needed employment and lodging, and quickly. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of endless trains and letters turning to dust in her hands. Morning brought no relief from her predicament, but Teresa was determined to face it with dignity. After washing and dressing in her most practical outfit, she ventured downstairs to find the innkeeper. "Is there a place in town that serves breakfast?" she asked. "Maggie's Cafe, 2 doors down," the woman answered. "Best flapjacks in the county." At Maggie's, Teresa ordered the least expensive item on the menu, a single egg with toast, and nursed a cup of coffee while listening to the conversations around her. Most centered on cattle prices, the ongoing drought, and local gossip. "Xavier Whitaker rode in yesterday," mentioned an older man at the next table. "Said the cattle drive went well, but they lost 2 men crossing the Pecos." "That Whitaker luck," his companion replied. "Man could fall into a pit of rattlers and walk out wearing snakeskin boots." Teresa's ears perked up at this exchange. Anyone successful enough to be discussed this way might have employment opportunities. After breakfast, she returned to Mason's general store as suggested. Harold Mason introduced her to his wife, Emma, a kind-faced woman who listened sympathetically to Teresa's predicament. "I don't know of any positions at the moment," Emma said apologetically, "but I can ask around. What skills do you have?" "I'm an accomplished seamstress," Teresa answered. "I worked for a dressmaker in Boston for 5 years. I can also read and write well, keep accounts, and I learn quickly." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "That might be useful. The Whitaker Ranch sometimes needs help with bookkeeping. Xavier doesn't trust the bank to handle all his affairs." "The man they mentioned at the cafe?" Teresa asked. "Yes, he owns the largest spread near Presidio. Difficult man, but fair by all accounts. Not married, which is why he sometimes needs help with household matters." "How would I apply for such a position?" Emma's expression turned uncertain. "It's not that simple. Whitaker doesn't come to town often, and he's particular about who works for him. But," she added, seeing Teresa's disappointment, "he's in town today. He usually has lunch at the hotel restaurant around noon." Teresa thanked the Masons profusely and left with new determination. She had 3 hours before noon, enough time to prepare. At the general store, she purchased paper and a pencil, then returned to her room to draft a letter of introduction that highlighted her skills and experience. At precisely 11:45, Teresa positioned herself at a small table in the hotel restaurant, her letter sealed and addressed to Mr. Xavier Whitaker. She had tidied her appearance as best she could, pinning her chestnut hair neatly and brushing the dust from her blue dress. The man who entered at 12:05 commanded attention without effort. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of a storm cloud, Xavier Whitaker moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to hard work and authority. His dark hair was trimmed neatly, and though his clothes were practical, they were of quality material. He looked to be in his early 30s, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against harsh sun. The waitress led him to his usual table, and Teresa watched as he ordered without looking at the menu. When his coffee arrived, she gathered her courage, rose from her seat, and approached his table. "Mr. Whitaker?" she asked, voice steadier than she felt. He looked up, surprise flickering across his features before his expression returned to neutral. Yes, my name is Teresa Donovan. I understand you occasionally require assistance with bookkeeping and household management. I would like to offer my services. She extended the letter toward him. Whitaker didn't immediately take it. Instead, he studied her face with unsettling intensity. Who told you I needed help? Mrs. Mason mentioned you might. I recently arrived in Presidio and am seeking employment. Recently arrived, he repeated, finally accepting the letter. From where? Boston, sir. His eyebrows rose slightly. Long way to come. Yes, sir. He broke the seal and unfolded her letter, reading it with deliberate care while Teresa stood awkwardly beside his table. Finally, he gestured to the chair across from him. Sit down, Miss Donovan. Relief flooded through her as she took the seat, though she maintained her composure. Your penmanship is excellent, he remarked, still holding the letter, and your qualifications seem adequate. However, I'm curious why a Boston seamstress would travel to Presidio, Texas, of all places. Teresa hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I came for an opportunity that didn't materialize, she said carefully. Whitaker's expression remained unreadable. I see, and now you're looking for any opportunity. Not any opportunity, Mr. Whitaker. An appropriate one where my skills would be valued. Something like approval flickered in his eyes. Direct and honest, I appreciate that. He took a sip of his coffee. I do need someone to organize my accounts and correspondence. The position would require you to live at the ranch. There's a small house for staff separate from the main house. Teresa's heart leaped. That would be acceptable. The work is not glamorous, he continued. You would also assist Mrs. Hatcher, my housekeeper, with various duties as needed. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board. It was more than she'd earned at the dressmaker's shop in Boston. When would you like me to start? I'm returning to the ranch tomorrow morning. Be ready at 7. He folded her letter and tucked it into his jacket pocket. 1 month probationary period. If either of us is dissatisfied, we part ways with a week's pay. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. I won't disappoint you. He nodded once. We'll see. Good day, Miss Donovan. As he turned his attention to his meal, Teresa understood she was dismissed. She returned to her table, heart pounding with relief and trepidation. She had secured employment and housing, but now faced the prospect of living on a remote ranch under the employment of a man she knew almost nothing about. That afternoon, Teresa used some of her precious funds to purchase practical items she would need for ranch life: sturdier boots, a simple work dress, and thick stockings. She also posted a letter to her aunt in Boston, explaining her situation in carefully optimistic terms. Before dawn the next morning, Teresa was dressed and waiting in the hotel lobby with her bags. The pre-dawn air was crisp when Xavier Whitaker arrived with a wagon, nodding curtly in greeting. Morning, Miss Donovan. Ready to depart? Yes, Mr. Whitaker. He loaded her bags into the wagon and helped her onto the bench seat, his hands strong and calloused. The journey began in silence as they traveled through the sleeping town and out onto the open range. As the sun rose, painting the vast landscape in hues of gold and amber, Teresa was struck by the raw beauty of this untamed country. So different from Boston's crowded streets and brick buildings. Here, the land seemed to stretch endlessly, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional cluster of trees marking water sources. It's beautiful, she remarked, unable to contain her awe. Whitaker glanced at her, seeming surprised by her comment. It can also be merciless. How far is the ranch? About 3 hours by wagon. Whitaker Land starts 10 miles out from town and extends north along the river for another 15 miles. Teresa tried to imagine owning so much land. You must have many cattle, 800 head give or take, and 30 horses. Pride colored his voice slightly. Built it from nearly nothing 10 years ago. That's impressive, he shrugged. Hard work and good timing. The war left opportunities for those willing to take risks. They fell silent again, but it was a more comfortable silence now. As they traveled, Whitaker occasionally pointed out landmarks or features of the landscape. By mid-morning they crested a rise, and the ranch came into view below them, a sprawling main house, several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse. "Whitaker Ranch," he announced. As they approached, ranch hands paused in their work to wave or nod in greeting. A large man with a gray-streaked beard emerged from the barn, striding toward the wagon as they pulled up to the house. "Morning, boss. Everything in order in town," he called. "As can be expected, Hank," Whitaker replied, jumping down from the wagon. "This is Miss Donovan, our new bookkeeper. Miss Donovan, this is Hank Morales, my foreman." Teresa nodded politely. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Morales." The foreman seemed surprised but touched his hat respectfully. "Madam," Whitaker helped Teresa down from the wagon. "I'll show you to your quarters, then Mrs. Hatcher will get you oriented to the house." The small cabin designated for Teresa's use sat about 50 yards from the main house. It was simple but clean, with a bedroom, small sitting area, and a lean-to kitchen. Basic furniture included a bed, table, chairs, and a washstand. "It's not fancy," Whitaker said, watching her reaction carefully. "It's perfect," Teresa replied honestly. After her tiny room in the Boston boarding house, this space felt luxurious. Whitaker nodded, seeming pleased. "Get settled in. Come to the main house in an hour. Mrs. Hatcher will show you the office and explain your duties." Left alone, Teresa unpacked her belongings, arranging them carefully in her new home. Through the window, she could see ranch hands moving cattle in a distant pasture, dust rising from their activities. The vastness of her new world both exhilarated and intimidated her. An hour later, she presented herself at the main house, where she met Mrs. Hatcher, a stout woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner but kind eyes. "So you're the Boston girl," she said, looking Teresa over. "Brave to come all this way. Hope you're not expecting fine city comforts here." "No, madam, I'm prepared to work hard and adapt." Mrs. Hatcher's expression softened slightly. "Good. Mr. Whitaker runs a tight operation, but he's fair. Do your job well and you'll be treated right." She showed Teresa through the house, larger than it appeared from outside, with a spacious kitchen, dining room, sitting room, and Whitaker's study on the ground floor, and several bedrooms upstairs. The office where Teresa would work was a small room off the study, containing a desk, filing cabinet, and shelves of ledgers. Mr. Whitaker's previous assistant left everything in disarray, Mrs. Hatcher explained, gesturing to stacks of unopened mail and disorganized ledgers. "Been 6 months without proper bookkeeping. The ranch is profitable, but only Mr. Whitaker knows by how much, and that's not a sustainable way to run things." Teresa surveyed the chaos with a critical eye. "I'll need at least a week just to sort through everything and establish a system." "That's what you're here for. Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. You'll take breakfast and dinner in the main house with Mr. Whitaker and me. Lunch is usually brought out to wherever people are working." The next days passed in a blur as Teresa immersed herself in organizing Whitaker's business affairs. She created filing systems, sorted correspondence by date and importance, and began reconstructing the ranch's financial records. The work was challenging but engaging, and she found satisfaction in bringing order to chaos. Whitaker himself remained something of a mystery. He was often out on the ranch from dawn until dusk, working alongside his men. During meals, he was polite but reserved, asking occasional questions about her progress but volunteering little about himself. Teresa observed him carefully, noting how the ranch hands respected him, how he listened more than he spoke, how his rare smiles transformed his severe features. A week into her employment, Whitaker appeared at her office door late in the afternoon. "How are you finding things?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Teresa gestured to the now organized shelves. "I've made considerable progress. Your correspondence is current, and I've reconstructed the financial records for the past 6 months." She handed him a ledger. "You might want to review these figures." He leafed through the pages, eyebrows rising as he studied her careful notations. "This is impressive work, Miss Donovan." "Thank you. I also took the liberty of drafting responses to several business inquiries that seemed time-sensitive. They're on your desk for review." Whitaker studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected when I hired you. In what way? You're more competent than I anticipated. He closed the ledger. Most people who come west from eastern cities struggle to adapt. I suppose I'm not most people, Mr. Whitaker. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Apparently not. He turned to leave, then paused. There's a ranch gathering tomorrow evening. A small celebration for the successful cattle drive. You should attend. Are you sure? I wouldn't want to intrude on. You're part of the ranch now, he interrupted. You should be there. The next evening, Teresa found herself standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of a gathering near the bunkhouse. Tables had been set up outdoors, laden with food. A few ranch hands played fiddles and guitars while others talked in groups or danced in the cleared area. Mrs. Hatcher appeared at her side, offering a cup of punch. Don't stand here like a fence post, girl, mingle a bit. I'm not sure I belong here, Teresa admitted. Nonsense. Mr. Whitaker specifically said you were to be included, Mrs. Hatcher nodded toward where Whitaker stood talking with his foreman. He doesn't extend such invitations lightly. As if sensing their attention, Whitaker looked up and caught Teresa's eye. After a moment, he excused himself from Hank and walked toward her. Miss Donovan, he greeted, I'm glad you came. Thank you for inviting me. It's a lovely gathering. Simple ranch entertainment, he said with a shrug. Nothing like Boston society, I imagine. I wouldn't know much about Boston society, Teresa replied honestly. I was a working woman there too. Something in his expression shifted. I've been making assumptions about you. Most people do when they hear Boston, she said with a small smile. They imagine fancy parties and finishing schools. And that wasn't your experience? No. My parents died when I was 16. I lived with my aunt and worked as a seamstress to support us both. Understanding dawned in his eyes. That explains your practical nature. The music changed to a lively reel, and several couples moved to the dance area. Whitaker hesitated, then asked, Would you care to dance, Miss Donovan? Surprised, Teresa nodded. I'd like that. His hand was warm as he led her to join the dancers. The steps were unfamiliar to her, but Whitaker guided her patiently, his usual reserve softening as they moved together. Teresa felt the curious glances from the ranch hands and their wives, but Whitaker seemed oblivious to the attention. As the evening progressed, Teresa found herself relaxing, enjoying conversations with the ranch wives and the simple, heartfelt celebration. When it came time to return to her cabin, Whitaker insisted on escorting her. Thank you for including me tonight, she said as they walked the short distance. I enjoyed meeting everyone. They're good people, loyal. He looked up at the star-filled sky. Out here, the people you surround yourself with matter more than anything. I can understand that. The isolation makes relationships more significant. They reached her door, and an awkward moment passed as they stood facing each other in the moonlight. Well, Whitaker said finally, good night, Miss Donovan. Good night, Mr. Whitaker. As spring turned to summer, Teresa settled into life at Whitaker Ranch. She efficiently managed the ranch's business affairs, freeing Whitaker to focus on operations. Their interactions became more comfortable, even friendly at times, though he maintained a certain professional distance. One sweltering afternoon in July, Teresa was working in her office when she heard a commotion outside. Looking through the window, she saw ranch hands rushing toward the corral, where a horse was bucking violently with a rider still mounted. Heart in her throat, Teresa hurried outside, reaching the fence just as the rider was thrown. It was Whitaker. He hit the ground hard but rolled quickly away from the horse's stomping hooves. Hank and another hand rushed in to subdue the animal while Whitaker got to his feet, grimacing. Are you hurt? Teresa called, alarmed by the way he held his arm. He looked up, surprised to see her. Just wrenched my shoulder, nothing serious, but his pained expression told a different story. You should have the doctor look at it. Town's too far for a minor injury, he dismissed, though he winced as he moved. At least let me help. I've dealt with such injuries before. Reluctantly, Whitaker followed her to the house, where Mrs. Hatcher helped Teresa prepare hot compresses and a liniment the housekeeper swore by for muscle injuries. Remove your shirt, please, Teresa instructed, trying to maintain a professional demeanor despite the intimacy of the situation. Whitaker hesitated, then complied with Mrs. Hatcher's assistance, revealing a torso marked with old scars and powerful muscles now tensed in pain. "This might hurt," Teresa warned as she began to apply the hot compress to his shoulder. He remained stoically silent as she worked, methodically applying the compresses, then the liniment, her fingers working the tightened muscles with firm, practiced movements. Mrs. Hatcher excused herself to prepare dinner, leaving them alone. "Where did you learn this?" Whitaker asked, his voice slightly strained. "My father was a dock worker. He often came home with similar injuries." Teresa focused on her task, trying not to be distracted by the warmth of his skin beneath her hands. "You mentioned he passed away when you were 16? "Yes." "An accident at the docks. My mother followed 6 months later pneumonia." "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "My parents died young as well, father in the war, mother from influenza shortly after." This personal revelation surprised her. "Is that when you came west?" He nodded. "Nothing left for me in Virginia. I was 21, had some experience with horses from our small farm, headed west with little more than determination." "You've built something impressive here," Teresa said sincerely. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, wincing as she found a particularly tender spot. "First few years, I nearly lost everything more times than I can count. Drought, rustlers, market crashes." "What kept you going?" He was quiet for a moment. "Stubbornness, mostly, and nowhere else to go." Teresa finished her ministrations and stepped back. "That should help." "You'll need to rest it for a few days, though. Not much rest to be had running a ranch. Delegate," she suggested firmly. "That's why you have Hank and the others." A hint of amusement crossed his features. "Giving orders to your employer now, Miss Donovan. Medical advice, Mr. Whitaker. Take it or leave it." To her surprise, he laughed a rich, genuine sound she'd rarely heard from him. "You're a remarkable woman, Teresa Donovan." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart skip. "Thank you for the compliment. Now put your shirt back on and rest that shoulder." The incident marked a turning point in their relationship. Whitaker began sharing meals with Teresa more regularly, often lingering afterward to discuss books or current events. He spoke more freely about the ranch and his plans for its future, genuinely interested in her opinions. Teresa found herself looking forward to these conversations, enjoying his dry wit and thoughtful perspectives. One evening in late August, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and purples. "I received a letter today," Teresa said after a comfortable silence. "From my aunt in Boston. She asks when I'll be returning east." Whitaker tensed beside her. "And will you return?" Teresa considered the question carefully. "I came to Texas because I thought I would start a new life with someone. That didn't happen as planned." "You never did explain exactly what brought you to Presidio," he prompted gently. The time for half-truths had passed. "I came as a mail-order bride," she admitted, cheeks warming with embarrassment. "I corresponded with a man named Samuel Bolton for 6 months. He sent for me, paid my way west, but when I arrived, I discovered he didn't exist." She stared at her hands. "I was fooled completely." Whitaker's expression darkened. "There are men who play such cruel games preying on women seeking a better life. I'm sorry that happened to you." "It was my own fault for being so naive." "No," he said firmly, "the fault lies entirely with whoever deceived you." His indignation on her behalf touched her deeply. "Regardless, it led me here to this job. For that, I'm grateful." "And my question, will you return to Boston?" Teresa looked out at the vast Texas landscape she'd come to love. "No, there's nothing for me there now. My aunt has remarried and moved to Philadelphia. My life is here now." She glanced at him. "As long as my employment continues to be satisfactory." Relief visibly washed over him. "It's more than satisfactory, Teresa. I don't know how I managed without you." The sincerity in his voice made her heart beat faster. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, each lost in their own thoughts. September brought cooler temperatures and increased activity as the ranch prepared for the fall roundup. Teresa found herself busier than ever, handling contracts for cattle sales and coordinating supplies for the coming winter. One morning, a rider arrived from town with an unusual delivery, a dress box addressed to Teresa. Puzzled, she opened it to find an elegant emerald green dress, far finer than anything she owned. A note in Whitaker's handwriting reads simply, "For the harvest dance in town this Saturday, if you would do me the honor of accompanying me. XW." Teresa stared at the gift in disbelief. The gesture seemed far more personal than employer to employee. With trembling fingers, she tried on the dress, finding it fit perfectly. Mrs. Hatcher must have provided her measurements. When Whitaker returned from the range that evening, Teresa was waiting on the porch. "The dress is beautiful," she said without preamble, "but I can't accept such an expensive gift from my employer." Whitaker removed his hat, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I was hoping you might accompany me not as my employee, but as my companion." "Your companion," she repeated, heart racing. He stepped closer. "Teresa, I think you know my feelings have grown beyond professional respect." "Have they?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "You must know how I value your presence here, not just your work, but you. Your intelligence, your strength, your company." He took a deep breath. "I find myself thinking of you constantly. If I've misinterpreted your own feelings, please tell me now." Teresa knew this moment would change everything between them. "You haven't misinterpreted anything," she said softly. Relief and joy transformed his features. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "Then you'll accompany me to the dance." "Yes, Xavier, I'd be delighted." The harvest dance was held in Presidio's small town hall, decorated with autumn leaves and lit by dozens of lanterns. Teresa felt self-conscious in her fine new dress as Xavier escorted her inside, aware of the curious looks from townspeople. "Everyone's staring," she whispered. "Because you're the most beautiful woman in the room," he replied, his hand warm against the small of her back. The evening passed in a blur of music, dancing, and introductions, as Xavier proudly presented Teresa to friends and business associates. By midnight, when they drove the wagon back toward the ranch under a canopy of stars, Teresa felt as though she were living in a dream. Xavier pulled the wagon to a stop at the halfway point where a vista overlooked the valley. "I wanted to show you something," he said, helping her down. The night was clear, the moon casting silver light over the landscape. Xavier pointed to a distant rise. "That ridge marks the northern boundary of Whitaker land. Beyond it is a valley with a stream running year-round. I've been thinking of building there, a new house." "It sounds lovely," Teresa said, wondering why he was telling her this now. Xavier turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I wanted you to see it because I hope you might consider making a life there, with me." Teresa's breath caught. "Xavier, are you—" "I love you, Teresa," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You came to Texas looking for a husband, and I've never considered myself the marrying kind, but now I can't imagine my future without you in it." Tears blurred her vision. "I love you too." He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. "I'm not the man you came here expecting to find." "I'm not what you ordered," she apologized with a watery smile. Xavier shook his head, his eyes intense in the moonlight. "You're everything I never knew to ask for." Their first kiss was tender, a promise exchanged beneath the vast Texas sky. When they finally broke apart, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Will you marry me, Teresa Donovan?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." They were married in Presidio's small church the first Sunday of October, with ranch hands and townspeople filling the pews. Teresa wore her green dress with wildflowers in her hair, while Xavier looked uncommonly handsome in a new black suit. After the ceremony, the entire community celebrated at Whitaker Ranch, with tables of food, music, and dancing lasting well into the night. As evening fell, the newlyweds slipped away to Xavier's house, now their house, to begin their life together. "Happy, Mrs. Whitaker?" Xavier asked as they stood on the porch, his arms wrapped around her from behind. "Completely," she answered, leaning back against his solid strength. "Though I still can't believe how much my life has changed in just a few months. I thank God every day for whoever played that cruel trick that brought you to Presidio," he murmured against her hair, "though I'd still thrash him if I ever discovered who it was." "I've made peace with it," Teresa said. "Some deceptions, it seems, lead to greater truths." Through the fall and into winter, Xavier and Teresa settled into married life with surprising ease. They began planning the new house Xavier had envisioned, with Teresa drafting designs for a spacious, practical home that would serve them for decades to come. Christmas brought a heavy snow, unusual for the region, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. The couple hosted dinner for the ranch hands who had no family nearby, filling the house with warmth and laughter. As they prepared for bed that night, Teresa watched Xavier stoke the fire in their bedroom. "I have a Christmas gift for you," she said, "one I couldn't give you in front of the others." Xavier turned, curiosity in his eyes. "What is it?" Teresa took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby. Next summer." Joy blazed across his face as the meaning of her words registered. He gathered her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. "A baby, you're certain?" "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I was in town," she said, laughing at his enthusiasm. "Are you pleased?" Pleased doesn't begin to describe it. He set her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Are you feeling well? Should you be resting more?" "I can hire more help around the house." Teresa placed a finger against his lips, amused by his protective instincts already emerging. "I'm perfectly fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, you know. Not my wife, not my child." He placed his hand reverently on her still flat abdomen. Everything changes now. In the months that followed, Xavier became even more attentive, often to Teresa's amusement and occasional exasperation. Construction began on their new house as soon as the ground thawed, with Xavier insisting on the finest materials and safest construction methods. By May, Teresa's condition was obvious, her belly rounded with new life. She continued managing the ranch's business affairs, though now working from a comfortable chair in their bedroom when fatigue overtook her. One warm evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Teresa felt the baby move strongly. "Give me your hand," she said, placing Xavier's palm where the movement was strongest. His expression of wonder when he felt his child kick for the first time brought tears to her eyes. "That's incredible," he whispered. "A few more months and you can meet this little one properly," she said, smiling. "Boy or girl doesn't matter to me," Xavier said firmly. "Just healthy and strong like their mother." "And determined like their father," Teresa added. In late July, as the heat of summer reached its peak, Teresa went into labor. Xavier, nearly frantic with worry, sent riders for the doctor and the midwife, then paced outside the bedroom as the women helped Teresa through her ordeal. After 12 hours, the distinctive cry of a newborn pierced the air. Xavier burst into the room as the midwife was wrapping a tiny bundle in a clean blanket. "You have a son, Mr. Whitaker," the woman announced, placing the infant in Teresa's arms. Xavier approached the bed slowly, overwhelmed by the sight of his wife cradling their child. Teresa looked exhausted but radiant, her face glowing with maternal pride. "Come meet your son," she invited. Xavier sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "He's perfect," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Just like his mother." They named him Thomas James Whitaker after both their fathers. The baby was strong and healthy, with a shock of dark hair like Xavier's, and Teresa insisted, her determined chin. By the time Thomas was 3 months old, the new house was completed, and the family moved into their new home. Set on a gentle rise overlooking the valley, the house was everything they had planned, spacious yet welcoming, with large windows to capture the sweeping views and deep porches for enjoying the sunsets. The ranch prospered under their combined management. Xavier's knowledge of cattle and horses, combined with Teresa's business acumen, created an operation respected throughout the region. They expanded their holdings, added a small orchard and substantial vegetable gardens, and became known for their hospitality to travelers passing through the area. When Thomas was 2, Teresa gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Rose. 2 years later, another son joined the family, William Harold Whitaker. Their home rang with children's laughter and the everyday sounds of a loving family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Teresa with a trip to San Antonio, leaving the children in Mrs. Hatcher's capable care for a week. They stayed in the finest hotel, attended the theater, and enjoyed the luxury of uninterrupted conversations and leisurely meals. On their last night, as they strolled arm in arm along the Riverwalk, Xavier asked, "Any regrets about the way your life turned out, Mrs. Whitaker?" Teresa considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder about that fictional Samuel Bolton. Was he real and simply unable to meet me? Was it all a cruel joke? I'll never know. Does it still bother you?" "No," she said honestly. "Whatever the truth, it led me to you, to our children, to this life we've built together. How could I regret that?" Xavier stopped, turning to face her. In the lamplight, she could see the lines that a decade of Texas sun and ranch work had etched around his eyes, the touch of silver at his temples. To her, he was more handsome than ever. "I never believed in fate," he said, "until a Boston seamstress walked into my life claiming she could manage my accounts." "And has she managed them to your satisfaction?" Teresa teased. "She has managed far more than that," Xavier replied, pulling her close. "She has managed to make me happier than I ever thought possible." They returned to the ranch renewed, diving back into the bustling life they had created together. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons, cattle drives, children's milestones, and quiet moments together that Teresa treasured above all else. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's head for ranching and his mother's love of books. Emma developed into a spirited girl who could ride as well as any ranch hand and still maintain the social graces Teresa insisted were important. Young William showed an early talent for numbers and a curiosity about the wider world that suggested he might someday venture beyond Texas. On the 20th anniversary of Teresa's arrival in Presidio, the family hosted a grand celebration at the ranch. Friends, neighbors, and ranch employees gathered to commemorate not just Xavier and Teresa's marriage, but the community they had helped build. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Xavier found Teresa standing alone, watching their children dancing with friends to the fiddle music. "Happy?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "Immensely," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "I was just thinking about that first day in Presidio, how lost I felt, how certain I was that I'd made a terrible mistake. And now," Teresa turned in his arms, looking up at the face she had loved for 2 decades. "Now I know it was the best mistake I ever made." Xavier's eyes crinkled with his smile. "Remember what I told you that night under the stars? You're still everything I never knew to ask for." "And you're still everything I needed," Teresa replied, "even when I was looking for someone else entirely." As they joined their children and friends in the dancing, Teresa reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought her to this place, this man, this life. She had come west seeking a husband and found not just that, but a true partner, a family, a home, and a love deeper and more enduring than anything she could have imagined in her Boston dreams. The mysterious Samuel Bolton had never materialized, but in his place had come Xavier Whitaker, a man who had taught her the difference between the life you think you want and the life you're meant to have. Together they had built something neither could have created alone. A legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, in their children, their grandchildren, and the land they had nurtured together. As the stars emerged above Whitaker Ranch and Xavier pulled her close for another dance, Teresa sent a silent thank you to whoever or whatever had guided her to Presidio that distant day. Some journeys, she had learned, take you exactly where you need to go, even when the destination isn't what you expected. In Xavier's arms, beneath the Texas sky they both loved, Teresa was exactly where she belonged, home at last, and forever.